All right. So the lymphatic system, like we mentioned, I kind of hinted at it when we were going over circulatory, but it is a set of vessels that kind of shadow the venous return system. Uh, the fluid inside there is known as lymph. It's basically plasma. It's known as lymph, and you have different parts to it. Of course, since it's the plasma and other things, it's part of the blood and it's produced there in the bone marrow and all. So it does help drain the excess fluid that has entered into the interstitial space because of the bulk flow due to blood pressure. You know how nutrients and such get into um, the cells, into that tissue, to that bulk flow. A special type of lymphatic vessel is found within the small intestine and it helps to absorb your dietary fats. That's known as a lacteal. Uh, but that's how the dietary fats get pulled in, and they don't go through the liver. They get absorbed, travel through that lacteal, travel through these lymphatic vessels that we're going to mention, and then back up into the bloodstream. And then a third thing, it helps to carry out an immune response. So that's why you have special types of lymphocytes and other immune cells and such that are part of this. So the vessels and such, they're one-way vessels. They start off as lymphatic capillaries. They travel along there as you go. Every so often there are these lymph nodes, and these lymph nodes are found in your peripheral system, arms and legs, things like that, and through your abdominal region, your neck, your head. They are encapsulated, and they have, they have this. They're just like little forts, and your lymphocytes and such hang out in there, looking for any foreign invader. So there you can see in that small intestine, there's the lacteal. And that, of course, it's in every villi of your small intestine, you have a lacteal up in there, and it helps absorb that fat. Whereas you would call lymph, the fluid in the lymphatic vessels, when the dietary fats get absorbed, it's known as chyle. The flow of lymph is helped along through the action of your skeletal muscles and through breathing. There are valves along the way to prevent the backflow of lymph. You filter out a lot of fluid into the interstitial space every day. And remember, all of that gets reabsorbed, but about 10%, and the lymphatic system picks up that excess and brings it back and returns it to the bloodstream and such. If a protein was to leak into this interstitial space, you have to always remember that water follows proteins. If the proteins were not removed, then you would have excess fluid within that interstitial space, and you would have swelling or edema, if you will. There you can see the vessels and how they're arranged, and also capillaries to vessels, and they always pass through the nodes and such. And then you have these trunks, these lymphatic trunks. You have a right and a left. The left is known as the thoracic duct. The right is the lymphatic duct. The right only drains the right arm, the right side of the head, and kind of the right chest. The left drains everything else and all. So the thoracic duct, it starts off in the abdominal cavity, right around the second lumbar vertebrae, in a dilated area known as the cisternae chili, and it receives all of this fluid from your legs, from your abdominal region, from your intestines and such, into that area. It travels up through a bronchomediastinal tube or duct, and then that goes into the thoracic duct. Now, the thoracic duct also drains the left side of the head, the neck, the chest, the left arm, and it dumps everything into your left subclavian vein. So the fluid comes in, it dumps into the from the intestinal side, from the lower extremities and such, into that cisternae chili. The bronchomediastinal, the subclavian, the jugular trunks all then duct into the thoracic or empty into the thoracic duct and such. And it's kind of, you find your clavicle bone, you kind of find your sternocleidomastoid muscle and such, and where those two meet right in that area. Put your finger right there, and that's kind of where that thoracic duct is. It's long, it's 15 to 18 inches long. When compared to the right side is only about a ½ inch long, but it does drain everything from just the right arm, right shoulder, right side of the head and such, and it ducts into the right subclavian vein. Other parts here, these other organs and other tissues and such, you have the primary ones and the secondary ones. So the primary lymphatic organs, this is where you're going to produce your B cells and your T cells, your bone marrow. That's where it's all produced, and then the T cells go and are matured in the thymus gland. Your secondary lymphatic organs and such, this is where you're going to mount your immune response, and these are your lymph nodes, your spleen, and your nodules. What's the difference between a node and a nodule? Nodules are not encapsulated, and nodules are going to be found along your mucous membranes, underneath your mucous membranes. So your nasal cavities, your oral cavity, your esophagus, your bronchial tubes into your lungs, your intestines, your stomach, intestines, your urinary tubes, any place that has a mucous membrane. And a mucous membrane is a membrane that is open to the outside. Right underneath that, you will have your mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, the MALT, and that is where you're going to find your nodules. A couple of good examples of nodules are your adenoids, which are at the back of your nasal cavity, nasopharyngeal cavity, and your tonsils, which are at the back of your oral cavity, or your nasal, your oral, for your pharyngeal oral cavity and such. The thymus gland, if we start off with that one, that's located in your mediastinum. If you find your heart and you go a little bit superior to the heart, it's right in there. It's not in the pleural cavities. It's not in the pericardial cavity, so it's in the mediastinum. A couple of lobes to it, and each one is capsulated. And the capsules are this kind of a fibrous connective tissue, and they will extend into the gland and kind of break it up into lobes, and these little extensions and such are known as tuberculae. It's a term you use throughout anatomy. Each little lobule has an outer layer and a middle. The outer layer is the cortex, and the middle is the medulla. The cortex is where you're going to find your T cells. That's where the T cells are going to go and start their maturation process. You'll also find these types of white blood cells known as dendritic cells. They look like, they have all these these extensions, these cytoplasmic extensions that makes them look like the limbs of a tree and all. Then you'll have these other forms of these epithelial cells, and these are the ones that will secrete the thymic hormones. And then you'll have specialized white blood cells, macrophages in there and all. So the immature T cells, which are produced in the bone marrow, migrate to the thymus. And as they move there, they're in the cortex, and they are exposed to thymic hormones. And then as they mature, and if they're viable, if you will, they then travel into the medulla and such. And they're worked on, and they mature even more, and then they will leave the thymus gland and then move out into the bloodstream and then to the lymph nodes. That medulla and such, this is where a large portion of the T cells, well, the T cells go to mature, really can't say large, all of them are going to go here and mature and such, under hormonal control. What else can I tell you about them? The thing with that thymus gland, it's very large in newborns and infants and such, and then it grows more until about puberty, and then after that it starts to atrophy or shrink. If you'll understand that, you can understand why you don't have a very good immune system at the beginning. You get a lot from mother through a passive immunity or an acquired immunity, and then you reach puberty, and then you go through there and you're pretty healthy all the way up to your 20s and 30s, and then this thing is going down, and then when you get to your 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, your immune system is not as active, is not as able to defend you as well, and so you'll see individuals succumb to diseases that, as a young person, you might not have, but as an older person, you're more susceptible. Cancer being one of those. Your nodes, your lymph nodes, and all. If you know where the nodes are, you follow the vessels and such, and everything follows these pathways. So if you figure this out, you can actually go to the nodes and look at the nodes, and you can discover what has invaded the body by looking at the nodes and all. So the nodes are compartmentalized with the capsular fibers and such, and the area within the nodes that actually house the immune cells and such, that's the functional tissue, that's the parenchyma tissue and all. So that parenchyma is a term, it's an older term, but it's still a useful term. The outer part of the lymph node is the cortex. Here you're going to find B cells and such. In these B cell nodules, or in these areas right here such, the B cells, when exposed to the correct antigen and shown what to do, will actually then become plasma cells. And a plasma cell is a cell that produces the antibodies and all. So since this is an area where this happens, where this starts, this is known as a germinal center and such. And some of these dendritic cells, the one with these long extensions, they will actually take in the antigen and process it, and then show it to the B cell and say, this is what you need to fight against and all. So you're also going to have invaders that show up through the lymph that have been picked up and such, and so you do have your immune cells and macrophages there to remove those. The inner part of the cortex, that's where you're going to find your T cells and more dendritic cells. And those dendritic cells are going to act as an antigen-presenting cell to the T cell as well. You move to the middle of that, and that's where you're going to find your B cells and more plasma cells and such, and more macrophages. And they're kind of embedded in these fibers, and it acts like a net. And so they're there, and as the lymph washes through, they're tasting the lymph. They're reaching out and smelling the lymph. They're looking for and trying to remove any and all foreign material, foreign antigens and such. So they're filtering. They're actually filtering this lymph, if you will. So